Hi, everybody.
All right, pretend we're starting. Great. All right. So yeah, thank you for our sponsors. This is a wonderful session, the organisation that's got putting all this together. So thank you everyone who's involved. We need to thank our traditional owners of the land and where we meet. Thank you to the traditional custodians, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Also need to consider our code of conduct. This is just an informational session for people. There's no harassment. Everyone is welcome of any gender, sexual orientation, disability, race, ethnicity, or whatever. You can read that yourself. Quick version, be constructive, be respectful, be helpful, and be kind. So be kind to me that I was 15 minutes late. All right, so low code. I want to talk about low code and custom apps for our modern day, our modern systems, modern applications, and the enterprise. A little bit about me. That's me, Chris O'Connor. I'm working with a team called DHCCA. I'm a principal architect there, working with customers to build out low code applications. I'm a approved and accredited developer within a tool called OutSystems, which is what I want to show people today, which I've been working with and enjoying greatly. I also work as another consultant, as I mentioned, within Katiro, which is my own company that I've started about 4.5 years ago. I'm a freelance developer, consultant, and working with Office 365 and SharePoint. And then, of course, if you want to say hello on Twitter, I am Grumpy Wookie. So there's a story behind that. And I was talking to my kids and said, today's May the 11th. It would have been good to do my session on last Monday, which was May the 4th. But that's the only Star Wars joke I will make. So I will move on. Hashtag M365May if you want to tag that and say hello. But I'm just going to set the scene, I guess, and talk a little bit about my session. Custom business apps, predominantly for enterprise users. I'm not going to be talking or covering off apps and mobile apps for consumers per se. So we're talking about the business apps, B2E, within a business, interacting and integrating with staff within your organization, people who are contractors and so forth. So things like leave requests, travel requests, those sorts of things that we've done for many, many years. We'll have a look quickly at some Microsoft tools and what we've got in our landscape, in our toolbox, and what we've used traditionally and now, as well as third-party tools, and that's what I want to talk about. So looking back, I always like to set the scene. Pardon me, I always like to set the scene and think about where we've come from in order to look ahead. I don't know who's old enough to remember InfoPath. It's not that long ago, actually, that we did lots and lots and lots of business apps using InfoPath, SharePoint and InfoPath. It often used to be the case that it didn't matter what the question was, the answer was SharePoint. We did everything in SharePoint. SharePoint 2007 first had the InfoPath tools and then moved into the browser-based online forms tools in SharePoint 2010, which 10 years ago now. But the other thing is that it was not really mobile friendly. So that was one of the reasons why when we got to around SharePoint 2013, we started to run up against problems with InfoPath. So, but yes, SharePoint Designer and workflows, we used to use Nintex, still use Nintex. And if we needed to do bigger functions, bigger integrations, we'd look at things like K2 or BizTalk, both great workflow tools, and now great forms tools within K2 and Nintex. The whole scenario, though, I guess we were really stuck inside SharePoint. Everything was in SharePoint. It was a server room down the hallway. In those days, we didn't really have things like Salesforce and Twilio and those sorts of integrations with other software as a service platforms. So we didn't worry. We could do everything in SharePoint, and that was fine. But that doesn't work these days. So now that we look forward, after a bit of nostalgia, what do we need these days for Office 365? Well, our requirements really are mobile. We really need a lot of mobile functionality and connectivity, offline as well. With this current lockdown scenario that everyone's living and breathing, we are offline from our core business systems. We're essentially mobile developers, mobile workforce by being on our laptops, but at home. We need to be able to use our phones and our tablets, and we can use our touch on our touchscreen laptops as well. So there's a mix and a blur between mobile and laptop, and they all need to work sort of seamlessly between each other. As I mentioned before, this integration now with the cloud and software as a service, other third-party applications, reading and writing using those back-end systems, that's something that we need these days. We can't just do it all in one system. No business works with just one system. We need our systems to be standalone outside SharePoint, and business processes, workflows, obviously that's the key reason for this. No one's typing data into screens and then just that's it. We need to do something with that data, and whether that's routing for approval or processing over to another system, there's always some form of business system or business process behind the scenes. The other consideration is that the tools that we use and the platforms that we use need to be rapid in nature. I think this whole coronavirus lockdown has proven how quickly businesses can pivot and change and set up teams and get people up and running quickly and easily. I think the need for rapid, like if we had to, if 10 years ago we would have needed to install a new SharePoint farm in order for people to be able to access documents, it would have taken weeks. We can't do that these days. We need rapid. And the tools as well, the intuitive way of building means that people can do things quickly. If it's intuitive for developers and quick and easy for end users, then there'll be easy adoption. And then we also want easy governance for IT. So we need our IT pros to be able to manage and undertake any updates and backups and storage and whatever else we might need. IT need to be on board also. It needs to be quick for them. So what do we have within our Toolshed from Microsoft? This is our this is what we're talking about today, I guess, is Office 365 and pivoting around the tools that we get from Microsoft. SharePoint and SharePoint lists, that's never going to go away. We've still got our custom lists and the quick and easy applications that we can build out, metadata within SharePoint, tagging of documents, lists and lookup lists. That's still a valid option for creating a business system, business app, but you quickly outgrow what you can do in a SharePoint list application per se. We can do our flow behind the scenes, or Power Automate as it is these days, to instrument a business process behind that data. But the user interface is a little, there's nothing really you can do within a SharePoint list until you customize the form then with Power Apps. So Power Apps, I suppose, I sort of first thought, oh, great, this is going to be a real successor to InfoPath. It's what we used to use for building big applications and different tabs, different views, but it's not really. It's a very different tool. You've got to look at it within its own right. You can't consider and compare it against InfoPath, but Power Automate and Power Apps are now the new way from Microsoft for building custom apps. And then Dynamics 365, we can't call it just CRM anymore. Dynamics is a bigger piece now within many organizations, the ability to create entities and forms and views. Again, extending that out with Power Apps. I've done some great development recently within using React.js and creating custom components for Dynamics using the Power Apps component framework. So the extensibility within Dynamics is vast, huge. But then I guess you can talk about then licensing costs as well. It can get rather expensive per user per month, and you've got to build out with Power Apps. Of course, then you've got full opposite end of the spectrum then. If you want to say, I want to create an application for a system using Azure, you can do whatever you want really. ASP.NET, C#, any React.js or Angular.js, any of those client and backend frameworks, Docker, Kubernetes, pretty much anything then. So you can architect your solution, storage queues, and we'll see some stuff later today. I know we've got some more developer sessions this afternoon, but Azure's a real developer landscape. The other thing to consider is looking at Gartner, and Gartner talking about low code, and that in August of last year, one of the Magic Quadrant for Enterprise was suggesting that low-code applications will now be pretty much 2/3 of all development by 2024. So that's only 4 years out. If in 4 years we're still writing code and lots of JavaScript and Azure, C# and whatever else, it's not going to be as quick to respond to market pressures, time to market. So low code's where we need to start looking. So looking at that, I want to introduce this tool that I've been greatly enjoying using called OutSystems, and we'll step through the features and functions of this platform and how that integrates with SharePoint. So I first heard of OutSystems about 18 months ago. I thought, oh, it's a new tool in the marketplace. It's a new app dev tool, but it's been around since 2001. So it's actually almost older than SharePoint. SharePoint was first around the same time. SharePoint 2000, STS 2001. So it's certainly grown and evolved and been a big player in many environments and many marketplaces. It's big in Europe. It's really just starting to get the strides now in Australia and through the US as well. But it's won many, many awards. And on the Gartner charts there, you see the multi-experience platform, MXDX, as they've termed it down the bottom here. MXDX is about lifecycle activities for multi-experience development across mobile, web, wearables as well, watches, and immersion touchpoints. So the where am I? Slides. So this is what I wanted to talk through as well, from a rather than a Gartner Magic Quadrant as to where things sit, but having a look at it from as a developer, again, my developer hat on, looking at whether the time to market and then functionality and capability, looking at then SharePoint lists, the blue dot there, that they're fairly quick. You can quickly and easily create a SharePoint list in a number of minutes, but you quickly, as I said, it's fast, but it's fairly simple. Nintex, you can do some great things as well. I've used Nintex over many projects, many solutions. Great forms, but less is more in some respects, so that you can do great user interfaces, but then if you need to extend it and move bits and pieces around, you can't, and that's a good thing because it's just productive, it's quick, but then a little bit more time to market. Power Apps and Flow, again, building out this landscape of functionality versus capability and then time to market. K2, I've probably put that in the upper quadrant, that you can do more, but again, it's going to take a bit longer. And then Azure, you can do everything, but it takes you a lot longer. So more on the time to market scale, but high on the functionality capability scale. And then I figure OutSystems sits in a high value corner here where you can do some custom things, but fairly fast. So this ClickDev tooling, which we'll see in a minute, and I sort of refer this to, rather than the Magic Quadrant, I'm going to call it the Muggles Quadrant. So for those who know Harry Potter, I'm a bit of a Muggle. But this is OutSystems, and the way OutSystems works is that, for developers who have looked at the 3-tier architecture of things from user interface, business layer, data layer, that sort of hierarchy, at least in a mindset, is still in place. That we have the way in which we architect and structure our data. We have our tables, our entities and fields. We essentially, like within CRM, where we can build out relationships and entity models, that's all backed by SQL databases in the background. We can have static entities as well, which are just for lookup lists, and we can build out our data map, data model. And then we can use those data entities within a user sense. We can look at all the different types of controls and componentry that you'd expect from something like Visual Studio, with buttons and text and input boxes, again, like Power Apps. Then we've got our logic. We can do our functionality based on load and validate any data, any delete logic as well. We can set that up at the database level for our referential integrity. And then we can integrate out using SOAP and REST. We can create REST endpoints as well as consume REST endpoints. And then there's a community of components that we can include from OutSystem called the Forge, where you can just add in plugins, and you can add in any Cordova components as well, custom JavaScript as well. So it's very open. I've just found that there's lots more that I can do with as compared to something like Power Apps, probably more akin to, it's got the power of Visual Studio with the ClickDev simplicity of something like Power Apps. So I want to show a demo of this today to see what you think as well and provide some feedback, and we can have some discussion. But the demo that I've got, a bit of a use case, this is what I want to show, and just to set the scene of what the application is that I'm going to be building, is that corporate communications, we've got an organization called Contoso, let's say, and they're promoting information out of their business to people that they can view on a mobile device. So we've got a SharePoint list. So we want to do some integration to that SharePoint list and read data from that. And we're going to have a mobile app, but we want this to be anonymous so that anyone can view it. Now, this is the clincher, I guess. Anonymous data. With something like Power Apps, you would need a license for those people to interact with your application, but we're going to do something bit clever. So the other consideration is that as I was sort of building out this app, the federal government has released this app as well for keeping up to date with news and media. This is something that could quite easily have been developed using something like OutSystems. And as far as the technical bits, as I mentioned, we've got a SharePoint list. We're going to make use of some REST API calls. And I have an app registration in SharePoint with a client ID and secret. And then we're making use of a token to call those REST endpoints. So very much like CSOM if you were to develop out an application using a client tool, SPFX or something like that, and using an auth token back to SharePoint. So just before I move on, we have a competition as well, obviously. We're now into week 3 of May 365. I'll leave that up on the screen if you want to grab out your phones and quickly do a quick scan as I get myself set up and make sure that we can have a look at OutSystems. I just had to close a few things while I was getting myself sorted out. So scan that code and we'll go and have a look at a demo. All right. Okay, demo. Okay, now let me just get back to where I was. Okay, so this is a component that I've set up within OutSystems, and this is essentially a code component where I'm getting an access token from my from some settings that I've got, my client ID and secret, and then I'm calling a method to get company news. And you'll note here I've got an authorization of bearer access token, which for those who've done dev against app-only principles, that will make sense to you. And then if I double click on that, you'll see the URL that I'm calling here is my API to get by title. So I'm getting my list, get by title, company news, and then getting my items. Now, if we have a look at that actual site here, well, there's my app registration. So that's the app ID, my GUI that I've got, and integrating back there, and I have my permissions that I set. But here's my SharePoint list here. So I'm just going to add a new entry just to show you that we are using real data here. So make sure the meeting invite works in M365. Okay, and a blurb saying testing worked, but demo gods bit me. So that'll get us some data in there. It's just a SharePoint list. We've got a title and a blurb, nothing really untoward there. But what I will do now is, now that we've got our SharePoint API, this is a component that I've built into my SharePoint REST API. I'm going to go now and do a new application. So this is using OutSystems, where I can build out not only mobile and web applications. I can do tablet applications and phone applications. If you think how you might use something like Xamarin in Visual Studio, that's probably more akin to what we're going to be getting. It's the power of something like Xamarin, but with ClickDev. So phone app, I can use templates if I wanted to, but I'm just going to use the out-of-the-box template here, M365 mobile, and I will upload an icon as well. Oops, I've got some icons over here. And I had it. I've got my May 365 icon, and I'm going to create an app. So what I've essentially done there is said to OutSystems, create me a new solution. Again, much like Visual Studio, create me a solution, and it sets up the framework for that. And I'll need to then add a module, and the module will be my phone app. So I'm creating a project within my solution, modules and apps, same sort of vernacular. But what we'll get then, as I mentioned, we've got our processes, which are for workflows and the like, interface, logic, and data. Now, what I'm going to do is I need to create a screen. So if I drag a screen onto my canvas here, it asks me what type of screen that I want to create. So there's a number of different template ones that we can take and use as well. These are mobile oriented as because we've chosen a mobile solution, but I'll just do a home screen here. And we get a blank canvas here that we can start to build out and paint out. Again, much like something Power Apps would provide. But what I'm going to do is include my integration to my SharePoint list by putting in a dependency. So that SharePoint component here is actually like a DLL that I've created. And I'm going to say that I want to use the get O365 news method. It pulls in any of the structures and data elements that I might need. And I need to, oops, because I've come from another screen, it was a smaller resolution. So, okay, so that's pulled in my UI, my integration to SharePoint. Now what I want to do is essentially create an onload. And in this onload, I want to fetch data from another source. So here, this is my code essentially, and I'll call this onload. And what I want to return out of my onload is I have an output parameter by default, but instead of text, I'm going to return out I can hear dinging. I'm not sure if that's questions, and we might hold them off till the end, unless there's some technical troubles. But I'll continue.
It's just people joining in, Chris. Keep going.
Great, thank you, Jag. Okay, so I'm going to return out of my load method the news response. But what I'm going to do is run a server action. And this server action will call my SharePoint REST API, get365 news. And once I've done that, I need to assign the output of that call, So I'm going to assign the output of this onload. So onload output is from my news output. That's pretty much all I need to do. And I've done a call to get data from SharePoint. Now I can use it, but let's put a title in here. We'll do May 365, and I'll put in an image in the top here in the header, and I'm going to choose to import an image from just a banner image, no big deal there, and a list, drag on a list control. So this is a wrapper, I guess, for each particular item. So I'm going to say that I want to use an item layout of list item content. So in my on the left here, I'm going to put an icon, and I'll put an icon, drag that over there. Oops, pick an icon, and let's say newspaper. That'll do. Oops, I dragged it to the wrong spot. News, drag that down there. Okay, and in my title, I want my data from SharePoint. So I'm going to use an expression, and in the title, I'm going to say from my onload output. So remembering onload will run as the screen opens, and it will return out a set of results. So I want to show for the current result, because there might be 10 rows, I'm going to show the title. Yeah, because I've been running on my 4K monitor, the screens have all resized. Okay, and under my expression for the second row, I'm going to put the blurb, current, where's blurb? There we go, blurb. All right, good. The other thing I will do is we'll have a look at, well, we could have a right button there to swipe out and go to the next screen if you're designing out mobile UIs. But we'll just have a look at the widget tree. And the widget tree is the structure within a page, thinking like the DOM, I guess, in a SharePoint, in a web UI. We can navigate down and get to the very specific item that we want to have. And what I'll do is I'm going to take this content here and wrap this in a container. And in this container now, I'm going to say that I want a margin at the bottom of 20 pixels, and that'll just put a nice little gap below us there. Okay, we're ready to give this a test. Now you'll see this big red X at the bottom, the one-click publish button. This is our sort of deploy and run. I've got an error, and what that's telling me is that my source must be set, because the source for my list, actually hasn't been set. So I haven't said to use that. Set that, green button, nice, deploy. Okay, so we're going to now show a sort of a runtime view of this app, and it will be something we can test out in a browser, but we really want to use this on a phone. So we want to test this out on a phone. So I can use my Air server, and I'll set this up and we'll show you how this works. But I need to, do one thing quickly. I'm just going to, So if I hit open in browser now, you'll note that the icon changed from, instead of a red X to when it was an error, to a green tick when it was ready to deploy. And now that it has deployed, I can open in browser. And here we go. I'll just zoom out a bit. And there's my UI. With that I can interact if I want to. That's fine just to do a quick rundown of it, previewing a device. But what I want to actually do is use my phone to test it out and see what it looks like on an iPhone. So to do that, I need to now go back to my distribute tab. So remembering we've created our modules, I can either generate and build out an iOS app. I'd need a Mac for that, and then you've got to set up for the store. I could also generate an Android app and then put that into the Google Play store. But what I'm going to do here is do a mobile optimized app that I can install from the browser. So if I just go distributors PWA, this means that I don't need to set up anything specifically to deploy it, and it's easy for people just to add it to their own phones. So if I run this now, make sure the meeting invite works. Why did I beg your pardon, 1 second. If I refresh this up, now we've got a code. Now what I'm going to do is use my phone here and present to my Air server, and then we can actually see what this looks like on an iPhone. So my Air server is up and running, and there it is. I'll just put this notepad here. Whoops. I'm going to drag notepad over there just so that we've got an easy way to look at it. All right. So I'm looking at my phone now, and if I go scan, and I want to scan a barcode. So now if I bring up my website, here we go. So I've come along and I can scan up to my code there. And that's loading up the app. Now, we've got a problem here because it's asking me to log in. Now, I wanted this app to be able to be anonymous. I wanted someone to be able to just look at it anywhere and anyone. So let's go back and have a look at what we need to do in OutSystems to change that. If I go back to my module now and go to change out of my widget tree, my home screen here, I can tick my box for anonymous and then hit publish. That's pretty much it. That is all I need to do. Now, if I was to go back to my phone here, and I'll give it a second to deploy. Air server, oops. If I refresh that, has been upgraded to the latest version. So I need to refresh one more time. Hang on, let me go back to my, where's my browser gone? Got too many windows open. Okay, I'll leave that up there and I'll leave the phone over to the side here. Okay, so I'm going to scan now, if you can see my phone. Okay. All right, so now that's running on an iPhone, and the I haven't had to log in. So if I hit the icon down the very, very bottom here, this button here, this will now take me over to the browser. So this is now in Safari. And if I hit the bottom icon down for bookmarks here, or in the middle at the bottom there, and say add to home screen, click add, that's added an icon now next to my COVID safe app. It's added my M365 mobile app. So let me just make sure I've got nothing open. And so now I'm a person who's totally anonymous. I can look at this mobile app and go open. And this is reading data from SharePoint with an anonymous set of data. And that's actually really powerful. One thing that I want to do now is that if I pull down like that, like if there was a new entry added to the list, I wouldn't be able to see it. So let's make that happen. So if I now go back to my widget tree in OutSystems, find my content, my list group here, and I'll actually do it on the whole page here. Use pull to refresh, and I want to say true, and then I need to say on pull to refresh what to do. So let's create a new client action, and if we just run is it run server event? No, I beg your pardon, it's not run server event. We want to refresh data. And the onload method. So essentially when you pull down, we want to rerun the onload method. So that's it. Hit the green button because everything's okay. We've deployed now. And there it's working. So if I go back to my phone now, and I'll close it off again. All right, if I open up my phone, it'll tell me that there's been an updated version of the app. It's been updated to the latest version. And if I pull down now, it should do a refresh, but I haven't got any data to refresh. So let's go back to SharePoint, go new, and say schools will reopen one day. My kids want to see their friends. Save. All right, so that's a new SharePoint item, even with a spelling mistake. But if I go back to my app now and pull down refresh on my phone, pull down, we should have, it's not doing it. There's a little icon there next to, I do something not right. That hasn't worked, and apologies for that. But strange. Anyway, that should have worked. That was working when I was testing out my demos, but I'll move on. But that's essentially all I needed to have done is set up my integration to SharePoint, grab out my data from SharePoint and put it into a UI. So I suppose I wanted to really concentrate on the power of the tooling within OutSystems of how easy it is to create a mobile app. And I was able to use anonymous data now within a phone app. And I could easily then save this to an app store and have people download it and use it. There's a number of different ways that we can integrate or have other forms as well. So if I was to create, there's galleries, these are all just things that I could then take these components and add my own version of things. Some of these are tablet oriented, some of these are phone oriented. But there's some examples, shopping cart even, and we just need to change out the data behind the scenes. And there's a whole heap of different components that we can get from the Forge as well, from outsystems.com, and load up a list of all the different types of themes, different types of templates, plugins to back-end or even front-end camera plugins and the like for mobile, Google mapping, and all of these are being done by the community, location, barcodes and the like. So let's go back to have a look at our slides. because that's pretty much what I wanted to talk through. Well, there is one other actually, but I don't know if I'll risk that because Teams is what I had. I had a demo here where I had a Teams tab as well, but I don't think I'll upset Teams by doing that. So because it's a web, I can run this OutSystems solution that I had in place as a web browser too. This is a web version of that same set of data. So I could take this here. Schools will reopen one day. That's with the incorrect spelling. I can take this URL and go to Teams and just go add a new tab, and within that tab put in that API, that web URL, and then suddenly I'm now using Teams, Teams and OutSystems and a custom app. Wary of time now, so I'll move on. So yeah, what I wanted to show as far as application development is that OutSystems is a great developer tool, great for creating mobile apps and web apps, integrating to backend systems and data, but it's much more than that, that it's actually an application platform. So you get a lot of hosting and a lot of the backend needs for IT folk as well. So we have, why is it not? Is that there's a code generator that creates out our .NET and SQL code, but then there's also a deployment pipeline as well. So DevOps between dev, UAT and prod, and looking at versioning of apps, versioning of components, so that we can easily maintain and update elements as we go. Our hosting as well, we can host OutSystems on a private cloud, being Azure or AWS, or it can be hosted by the vendor, being OutSystems as a software as a service. So you can get started easily. If you jump onto outsystems.com, get started for free. You can just download that IDE that I was looking at. It's about 200 or 300 meg, I think. It's not much. And you can get started and create some apps. And there's some really, really good learning materials as well, and the exams as well. That's pretty much what I wanted to show. I've left 5 minutes for some questions, knowing that we started late. But you can contact me there you can either get me at grumpywookie on Twitter, or at Kachiro or DHCCA. That's my email address within the work that we're doing with OutSystems. More than happy to have some discussions and talk through how this might help you and your business. I'll throw over to questions in a moment, but thanks again to our wonderful sponsors for making this possible, and thanks to the great organisers as well. This is a big undertaking, and there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I don't think anyone appreciates all the work that's been done behind the scenes. So thank you, everyone. And there's the code to scan if you want to enter the prize draw. But let me bring up any questions.
Yeah, so Chris, just one thing I wanted to add is I've seen a few people join in late because we've switched the platforms from a live event to a Teams meeting. So the recording will be available for this session on the YouTube channel. I've just posted the link to the YouTube channel if anybody wants to go and subscribe and have a look at it.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll stop the recording then, unless we've got any specific questions that people are calling out.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Well, we're still waiting for people to leave the questions.
Sure.
You did mention something about comparing with Power Apps and OutSystems about the licensing.
Yep.
Can you just touch base on what sort of licensing details, please?
Yeah, sure. OutSystems has there's a small, medium, and large licensing. There's there's the free version, which is free and always will be free, and that's what I was demonstrating on. It's fully functional, but there's no guaranteed uptime and there's no backup, and you're on your own basically. But it's still a SaaS offering. You could do some small bits and pieces there if you like. Then there's basic, and then standard, and then enterprise, and all they really differ is a lot of the support and the number of users that you can host. Is like basic, I think, is 100 users, and then enterprise is 1,000, and then basic is 100, standard is 1,000, and the enterprise is over 1,000. The costs I don't know on that. I'm not really a licensing person, but I guess the point being is that it's probably more like an application that you pay for and make use of for custom apps. Power Apps is good because people who are inside an organization and have an Office 365 license have a license to Power Apps if they're on that specific E3 or E5 licensing. I suppose from a developer level, I was a huge fan of InfoPath, but I've never really gravitated towards Power Apps. I found it a little hard and clunky in some parts to build applications. Flow I like, Power Automate I like, but Power Apps is something that I've always found a bit lacking. I've looked at products like Nintex. Nintex Forms, the new modern form design, is fantastic, but it's a very railed experience, and that less is more paradigm of there's some things you can't do, but that's for a reason. So then I gravitate towards things like K2 or Visual Studio, and obviously Visual Studio, you've got to create everything yourself. You can do everything you need or want to do within, say, SPFX or React, but so I suppose OutSystems provides a developer with a ClickDev function more like Power Apps, but with the functionality of something like React and Xamarin. So yeah, it's horses for courses, I guess. And yes, there is a licensing component to it, but I mean, it's you get what you pay for. The tools from Microsoft have always been that. There's always been within enterprise, there's a reason why people bought Nintex, is because the Microsoft tools didn't do everything they needed or wanted to do. And they're more than happy to be proven wrong. I know there's people like that we'll see sessions shortly, actually. John Liu's doing some stuff with Power Apps and Flow. I'd be keen to see that. He's a bit of a Power Automate genius. So I guess, yeah, that in a roundabout way, you have to pay for a tool for a license. You don't have to if you want to use Power Apps, but you miss out on things like some of the great IDE and some of the great DevOps experiences.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Chris. So if anyone else has got any questions, please leave them in the chat, and Chris will get to them. If not, I think that pretty much we're at the end of the session. Chris, can you give us the recording when it's available, and happy to push it onto the YouTube channel for people to check in.
Yep, great. I'll do that. Thanks, Jag, for all the help. And sorry, apologies for the hiccups. Technology bites us sometimes, and it bit me today, but we got there in the end.
No worries, Matt. It's a good session. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining in.
Thank you. Have a great day. And yeah, tune in for the other guys' sessions because they're going to be great. I'll be watching myself. Cheers all. Thank you.